you're taking these terms that were given to you by your oppressor and you're making something out of them without a doubt, but at the same time, you're still working through the terms that your oppressor gave you. So that's where you hear her say, well, yeah, I'm Black, like, but not how you say the Black, right? I don't identify with that Black in the way that you identify with that Black. So that's a very good point, Cecilia. Anybody else? So Mari, what did you think about the poem?
I think I agree also with Cecilia and how like and what you said earlier and how like I feel like the author in the beginning was exclaiming that she was proud to be Black, and how she states that they were uh caught dancing in the rhythm of like the reciting. So it goes as well to like the culture and just appreciating their ancestors and like where their roots come from.
Yeah. So what did anybody think about the use of Spanish within the poem? Did you find that significant? What do you think? And even more so, what does it translate to? Because I couldn't know what the translation meant. So anybody found that of interest, or could translate what the Spanish terminology in the poem is?
So I know, and I think it's towards the end after the one line force of soy. Soy means am in Spanish. So I noticed that. And then the last line where it says after refusal to uncurl, me gritaron negra means they called me Black.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Also, did anybody, so you mentioned the refusal to uncurl, right? Did anybody find that significant? Because think about how she leads and Fred Moten leads into that. When said in concert, comes uncountable as hairs, new groomed and grooved, refusal to uncurl, right? So what do you guys think that means? What do you think the significance of hair that refuses to uncoil or uncurl? So we're dealing with hair texture, right? Typically, when you look at Black folks' hair that hasn't been texturized or treated, it's curly, right? So when he talks about hair that will refuse to uncurl, he's talking about hair that's going to remain kinky, right? The whole dichotomy between having to straighten your hair to look professional, right, which looks more European in aesthetic, or allowing your hair to grow naturally the way that it is. So he's juxtaposing those two realities as well, right? So the pride in who you are situates you in the comfortability of having your hair be curly and having your hair not look like the European standard of beauty. So what I had to do, I looked up that last line that was in Spanish to kind of get a better understanding of what it is. And it led me to a Peruvian poet by the name of Victoria Santa Cruz. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play the poem that she wrote that Fred Moten produced. The poem that we read together, it stems from this actual poem from Victoria Santa Cruz. So give me 1 second.
Professor, can I say something real quick about? So when I read the sentence about the hair, it kind of made me feel like it might have been a little bit of a metaphor, because the author could be saying that, so Black women, that they have their hair, it's curly and everything, and when they start to straighten it, like how you said, they start to put products in it to make it more European, that they're turning their back against who they are to find their way, or to be more European. Meanwhile, in this case, they're saying that they're not going to do that, saying that they're not going to curl their hair, so they're not going to turn their backs to who they are, and they're proud of who they are, which is a Black woman.
Absolutely, Samantha. Yes, it's used as a metaphor to symbolize that. That's like the perfect interpretation of what Fred Moten was trying to get us to think about. And I think too, once you see Victoria Santa Cruz, a lot of this is going to make a lot more sense. So let me jump into that real quick.
Make sure you stand out. Go to Wix Econ.
Tenía 7 años apenas 7 años. ¿Qué 7 años? No llegaba a 5 siquiera. De pronto unas voces en la calle le gritaron, ¡negra! 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 ¿Soy acaso negra? Me dije. Sí. ¿Qué cosa es ser negra? ¡Negra! Yo no sabía la triste verdad que aquello escondía. ¡Negra! Y me sentí negra. ¡Negra! Como ellos decían. ¡Negra! Y retrocedí. ¡Negra! Como ellos querían. ¡Negra! Yo odié mis cabellos y mis labios gruesos y miré apenada mi carne tostada y retrocedí. ¡Negra! Y retrocedí. ¡Negra! 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 Pasaba el tiempo, siempre amargada. Seguía llevando a mi espalda mi pesada carga. ¿Y cómo pesaba? Me alacé el cabello, me volvé la cara. Entre mis entrañas siempre resonaba la misma palabra. ¡Negra! 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 Hasta que un día que retrocedía y que iba a caer. ¡Negra! 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 ¿Qué? ¿Y qué? ¡Negra! ¡Sí! ¡Negra soy! ¡Negra! ¡Negra soy! ¡Negra! ¡Sí! ¡Negra soy! ¡Negra! ¡Negra soy! Yo hoy en adelante no quiero laciar mi cabello. ¡No quiero! Y voy a reírme de aquellos que por evitar, según ellos, que por evitarnos algún sinsabor, llaman a los negros gente de color. ¿Y de qué color? ¡Negro! ¿Y qué lindo suena? ¡Negro! ¿Y qué ritmo tiene? ¡Negro, negro, 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 negro! Al fin comprendí. Al fin, ya no retrocedo. Al fin, ya avanzo segura. Al fin, avanzo y espero. Al fin, y bendigo al cielo porque quiso Dios que el negro azabache fuese mi color y ya comprendí. Al fin, ya tengo la llave. Negro, 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 negro.
So, you have a cool idea.
All right. So now that you've seen that, how do you understand the poem a little bit differently?
Like from watching the video, I now understand that like in the beginning, she exclaims that when they shouted black, they made it seem like it was something bad. So she began to kind of like, I guess, self-hate, where she states that she started to straighten her hair, put on makeup, because she was ashamed of that term, the way they used it. But as time went on, she learned to like love herself. So once they shouted black again, that she learned to be proud of it.
Yeah.
And and just make it part of who she was.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, what stood out too, like I don't know if you guys noticed her being coiled up, right? And then certain parts of the poem, she'll start to uncoil herself. And to me, that kind of symbolized that burden, that heaviness she felt of being Black is embodied in this here. And then as she comes away with that, she's able to uncoil herself. And also, this lets you know that Fred Moten is really writing a poem about the poem that Victoria Santa Cruz produced, right? And then also to Douglas's point, when you talk about the hips and the rhythm, now you see why the hips and the rhythm can make a little bit more sense, because you see that depicted in the actual visuals of the poem. Anybody else have thoughts about the video now that we've watched that as it complements the poem? So Melissa, what did you think about the video as it pertains to the poem?
I think the video had more emotion with her statement instead of reading it, and how the poem didn't say she was like Black enough, and I think her saying it in person makes it counter argument with what the way they call her. Like she wants to be called the way she's trying to say it.
So the video shows more of the juxtaposition in the change of the way that she identifies with Blackness. I would agree with that. That's a very good point. And also, Melissa, you bring up a point also, when reading poetry, it's also often not the best practice to read it in your mind or in your head, right? The verbal aspect of it is important. Hence, this is an oral history class, right? So the spacing in between certain words symbolizes pauses, right? So it's very important to read these poems out loud because it has a different appeal, to Melissa's point, hearing them verbalized opposed to reading them in your head. Anybody else want to comment on the video before we move on? Okay, so we'll jump into the next poem. The next poem is from Alexis Pauline Gumbs. It's from a book entitled Spill. What I do want to do before I kind of jump into my thoughts, I attached the intro to the book to kind of give you guys a little bit more context about the project in this book. This Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a literature professor, I believe, at either Duke University or North Carolina University. But she's a really big fan of this feminist or this womanist thinker, Hortense Spiller. And so keep in mind, right, Hortense Spiller is her mentor, if you will, and she entitles the book Spill, which is derived from Hortense Spiller's last name. I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from the intro, and then we'll kind of get into my thoughts about the poem. Again and again, there were phrases in her work that did far more than make her point. They made worlds. They invited affect with an A. They brought to mind nameless women in unknown places who were laughing and looking sideways at each other, and a world that couldn't understand them. I'm going to move a little bit further down the passage. This space, which is a temporary space, which we must leave for the sake of future travelers and our own necks, is sacred and dedicated. Libation for the named and the nameless. This is for Black women who made and broke narratives, the quiet, the quarreling, the queer. This is where, this is what, this is how. And then she gives you a definition of spill: to cause or allow liquid to flow over the edges of its container, especially unintentionally. You'll spill that coffee if you're not careful. Synonyms: to knock over, tip over, upset, overturn. And I think the last two synonyms, to upset and to overturn, become really important because this text is scenes of Black feminism and fugitivity, right? And then you think about fugitivity is really to upset and to overturn the order, status quo. So that kind of gives you somewhat of a context as to what the project Spill is, what Pauline Gumbs is up to with the project Spill. I try to make this clear online, but so like this For Harriet is not attached to this here. So these are two separate poems. I don't know if you guys read both of them in conjunction, but they're meant to be separate. So again, to Douglas's earlier point, a really short poem, but kind of what I gathered from this, there's a shifting in realities for the protagonist. There's a desire to be actional, and the actional just means like to be able to take action, right? And then this notion of knowing is not equal to know. That became really, really profound to me. So those were the things I found of interest. We'll open it up to conversation. again, something simple as, you know what, I didn't like the poem. Shit was whack. It was confusing. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Can I go?
Yeah, please do.
With this poem, I was kind of confused in the beginning. And then when I went towards the end of the poem, I started to get an understanding of how, like, it was mainly towards Harriet Tubman because of, not just because it said it there, but like the description she gave of how the North Star and how to look at the North Star and look for freedom, something like that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That was like my main takeaway, but the first 2 pages, I was getting kind of lost there.
Yeah, well, and then keep in mind too, Douglas, that first page is not tied to the Harriet Tubman poem. So that would help confuse you if you're trying to push those 2 poems together. But you also bring up a good point in the sense that you have to be somewhat familiar with Harriet Tubman's story to really understand the poem, right? So like, if you don't know that she was trying to go from the South north and she was using the North Star as a guide, you would miss the significance of that. So it's a very good call out in the sense that, you know, you have to be somewhat familiar with who Harriet Tubman was and the work that she did. Good point. Anybody else? Anybody besides Douglas read the poem?
I read it too, and I also kind of felt that way too. Like I didn't get what it was saying at first, but then like when I reread it, it like started to make more sense.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, Cecilia, you kind of have to read these poems more than once to make them make a little bit more sense. And that's another reason I gave you guys really short poems. I would hate for you to have to read a long poem multiple times to gather an understanding. But yes, it's a labor, right? You kind of have to engage these poems on multiple fronts to get a better understanding of the poem. Somebody else, thoughts on the poem? Again, you can even say, I didn't like the shit. That's fine too. That's an opinion. That's valid. Anybody did not like the poem? Okay, so if everyone liked the poem, then we should have something to say about the poem. Yaneli, what are your thoughts on the poem? Yaneli, we're waiting on you.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I really liked so like how everyone's been saying so far, it was very confusing. But I really liked the last giant paragraph where I assume it's the mom, Harriet Tubman's mom. She felt when her daughter finally escaped, and I think that's something that a lot of Black individuals felt when they knew in their hearts that they didn't want their children to be subjected to everything that they had to go through. So they knew when their children finally left, and they felt at peace.
Yeah.
I feel like they felt a relief.
So you're absolutely correct, Samantha, but keep in mind, right, like this poem that you're referring to doesn't apply to the Harriet Tubman poem. And I'm gonna let you guys know as to why I say that, right? So think about what era Harriet Tubman was existing in, right? She was a enslavement abolitionist. So she's existing in the time of slavery. So the temporal context is important, right? But a couple things. Since she and the farmers never upgrade to install a rotary phone, right? So if there's a rotary phone, we know we're not talking about the time of enslavement, right? What else you say? Can you imagine she bit her nails while she taught herself? There's another thing about a corner store, right? There was no corner stores. Can you tell she avoided the corner store and the gossips and the seers? There was no corner stores during the time of enslavement, right? So that's another insight to let you know that these are 2 separate poems. But your assessment, Samantha, of what was going on, You're absolutely correct, right? It's just the desire to see your children do well, right? The desire to see your children not have to fall into the same trappings that you fell into. Very good point. You know, another thing kind of towards the beginning of the poem, right? Every form of rice you put on the other side of sugar, every stitch through cotton, and the numbness of her finger tips. The rice. What's the significance, and you guys may not know this, but I'll throw it out there. What's the significance of rice as it pertains to fugitivity, as it pertains to Harriet Tubman, as it pertains to escaping the plantation? Does anybody know? So oftentimes, what the enslaved Africans would do when they know they're about to escape, run away, they would take grains of rice and braid it into the hair of the women. So that way, while they're on the road, they can unbraid their hair, get the rice, cook the rice, and have a meal, right? Another thing where the hair becomes significant is they would literally braid maps into the hair of those who were escaping so they would know how to guide their travels, right? So that are all encompassing these notions of fugitivity that Pauline Gumbs wants us to think about as she's dealing with this text. So another thing that you find, right? So we've read two current texts. So I believe All This Beauty from Fred Moten was produced in 2018, 2017, around there. Spill from Alexis Pauline Gumbs, that was produced in 2019. So this is a very contemporary poetry, very contemporary artwork. It's not as abstract. I'm sorry, it's more abstract than a lot of the poems from like the 60s and 70s. The poems in the 60s and 70s are a lot more straightforward. They're a lot more clear and a lot more easier to understand. So with that, we'll move into Nikki Giovanni. Has anybody heard of Nikki Giovanni? Yes, no, maybe?
No.
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 So a world-renowned poet, right? If you're into poetry, you definitely heard the name Nikki Giovanni. She made a couple appearances at Casa LA in the early 2000s. The poem that I assigned was the poem Black Power. Some of you may have read the poem Seduction. We could talk about that too if you like. But for me, what stands out for the poem on Black Power is just what the work that the Black Panther Party, what that work symbolized and what that work meant for the Black community, right? It gave them a sense of protection. She used the term miracle, right? So it's a miraculous occurrence, this Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party serves as a counterforce to the dehumanization and the humiliation that was enacted upon the Black body, right? So in the poem, she says that the police come by and call the women whores. She says, you know, we weren't smoking weed, we wasn't doing nothing, we just standing on the corner, and this is how they interacted with us, right? But that Black Panther Party was a counterforce to that humiliation. So for me, those are some of the things that stood out in that poem. Again, we'll open it up to you guys to see what you thought, what you guys found of interest. Was this a little bit more easier to understand? You know, confusing also? Curious to know.
I found it more interesting, and I loved the whole how at the end they were all like, none of the zoos or circuses within 50 miles have reported a panther missing. I was all like, dang, that, I don't know, I just felt like really cool when reading it.
Yeah, that's my favorite part too, Priscilla. Like, it's a great way to, if there is any ambiguity or if you are confused about what she's talking about, I'm gonna just put this bow on it so you know exactly who and what I'm talking about. Good point. Anybody else? Masra Guerra, what were your thoughts on the poem?
For me, it was like a little bit confusing to like understand, but now that like we're like talking about it now in class, it's more like I'm able to understand it more.
Yeah, and I think too. Think of, okay, you guys probably don't know this, but like in the back in the day, poetry was like recorded and like how we listen to music, people would listen to poets. Oftentimes too, poetry would be done in, you know, poetry spots, spoken word spots. So it would give the opportunity for the audience to converse about what they heard, to help kind of glean different meanings and different insights on the poem. So part of poetry is what we're doing here is the conversation about what was digested, right? And helping and working with each other to get a deeper understanding. So that brings up a good point as well. Any last comments on the Nikki Giovanni poem? All right, so I know many didn't read the James Baldwin one, so we'll skip to the last poem, the titled Black Love Supreme. I don't really have any thoughts on that one, but I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts on that was. That's the one that starts off something like, I've been watching you for a while now.
Can I say something about
Yeah,
that?
please.
I personally thought it was very easy to read and understand, and it seemed more like a letter to her. And what stood out to me was how in the beginning of the poem, it seemed like maybe this was during the time period where he knew of her and she didn't know of him, but reading it more towards the middle, I realized it was more in a time period where she was owned, most likely, by a white man who was using her and abusing her. And I thought it was interesting how he was trying to still overcome that and show his love through the poem. And I also had a question about more backstory on the gods he's talking about Obatala and Oguna and Shango, and I wanted to know more about that and why he tells her to go towards their gods to be free.
Does everybody know what Melissa's talking about as far as that passion in the poem? I want it to be a more involved conversation, because I would like to hear what other people's thoughts were on that portion, because that you bring up a good point, Melissa. Could you do me a favor? Could you read a passage of that if you have it available?
Okay. So it's towards the last page, and it says, powerful black gods, Obatala, Ogun, and Shango, you also have ancestors to call on. They won't take over 400 years to answer your prayers. Your gods know your pain, granted your ancestors victories over their oppressor, the same oppressor who likes to put his knee on your neck. And I thought he was telling her to overcome how I guess the white man was using her.
Yeah. Anybody else's thoughts as to what the interpretation of that passage was?
It might be wrong, but I actually kind of think he's trying to tell her to stop like believing in the religion that she was forced to be in, and to go back to the gods that he was talking about, like ignore Christianity. I'm assuming Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is a point to that, because I think if you read up a little bit further, it says, you know, damn, his God takes a long time to answer prayers, right? So it is a critique of that religion. I glean that from there also. Anybody else has some insight or some thoughts about what that passage means?
Is it like he's tired of like watching her go through that suffering, and that, you know, like towards the end he will not have been watching, like they're basically gonna get all that all the pain that they've inflicted is gonna come back to them, kind of, and like that? Or I was a little bit confused on that.
Okay. No, I mean, I think that's definitely something there. I mean, when I read it, I kind of thought the same thing too. You're no longer gonna, you're gonna know I've been watching, right? So there's gonna be some kind of action taking place. But to answer Melissa's question more directly in the space of, you know, insight about those gods, when you talk about ancient African tradition and ancient African spiritual practice, there's traditions like Ifa, there's traditions like Yoruba, there's traditions like Akan, And those are the deities of those spiritual traditions. So like Ogun is the god of creation. I'm sorry, excuse me, Obutala is the god of creation, right? Shango is the god of war and weaponry. Ogun is the god, is like the kingly god, right? He's a god of decision making and wisdom, right? So it's an homage to these spiritual deities that were African and that African people believed in worships prior to European contact. So just to kind of give you that background and that context, Melissa. What are some other thoughts about the if that answers your question, Melissa? If not, let me know. We can go deeper.
Yeah, I understood that now.
Okay. What are some other thoughts about the poem?
For me?
And just period, anybody?
Oh, okay.
For me, the passage kind of reminds me of how like as many were enslaved, they began to kind of pick up like the white man's tradition. Because in the other page, he states, I mean, the author states, it's over here. Damn, his God takes a long time to answer prayers. And then in the next page, the author states, your gods know your pain, granted your ancestors victories over their oppressors. Like how like as many were enslaved, they started to pick up the white man's traditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. But to me, that's kind of what I gathered also. And I think the damn, his God takes a long time. It gives you the greatest insight into that critique. Anybody else? So group A on Tuesday had an interesting analysis of the poem. They, few of them perceived the author of the poem not being Black. It perceived it as somebody who is outside the Black community, observing the happenings of the Black community, or possibly was also thrown out, somebody who is in an interrelational relationship with a Black woman. Did anybody get that theme or that idea?
No, not really.
No.
I never really thought about it like that.
I actually did.
Yeah. Can you guys
it was just mainly because they talked about Du Bois. That kind of like struck something when I was reading it, since Du Bois is somebody who a lot of Black individuals like they admired. Mm-hmm. And I was looking a little more into him, that it wasn't just Black people who admired him, it was other people of color. It wasn't just limited to them. So it kind of like clicked. And then also, I'm not sure if they changed the words to it, but also because everything here is just English, there was no slang to it, or if there was, it was very little slang.
So, okay, just to push back on that, Samantha. One, not all Black folks talking slang, right? And then also think about, we read a whole canon of Black authors, and very few of them use slang in their writing, right? So, not to say that you're wrong, but just to kind of get you to think about, or to detach yourself from the idea that if it's slang present, then they're probably someone Black, right? So the Black academic canon especially goes way beyond slang. And you probably won't see a lot of that within academic writing. But definitely the idea with Du Bois, that's a good point. That's a great analysis that you're making, right? So you like, I see Du Bois being used. Let's see who identified with Du Bois, and that helps you draw your analysis. That's a very good point. Couple other thoughts about the poem, then we'll close it out. Did y'all like the poem? What was your out of the ones that we read? Which one did you guys like the most?
I like this one, but I don't know if we were supposed to read the seduction one, but that one was like interesting as well. Is this and seduction?
Let's did anybody else read the seduction play?
What was that again?
Did anybody else read the Nikki Giovanni play entitled Seduction? It was yeah, that's kind of a cool play.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit before we close out. What was your thoughts on that? Brizza, why don't you start us off?
I was reading it, and then for me, like at the end where he said like, oh, Nikki, isn't this counter-revolutionary? I don't know, I just found it like funny.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why I really liked it.
Yeah, she has a great way of closing out her poems, right? Like she's very good at putting a bow on her poem. And two, I think it problematizes this notion of the revolution being masculine, being hard, right? There's no love within the confines of the revolution. And it really brings to the forefront the Black quotidian, or just a Black daily activity, and just Black love, right? Just very plainly, just how Black folks interact and love each other amidst these oppressive forces. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I mean, with that poem, I was like kind of weirded out at first, like towards the end. I mean, it was a cool poem though. It was very interesting.
Yeah, a little bit of little sexual connotations in there, right? But that's part of life, right? Like
yeah, when I was reading it though, I wasn't like expecting that. I was like, she's not talking about this. Right. And then as I kept reading it, and it was clear.
Yeah, that's definitely what she was talking about. I mean, the title is Seduction, right? Like she kind of laid it out there for us. Like, yeah, this is what we get into. So any other comments or any other last comments about either of the poems before we kind of close out? All right, so full disclosure, the Black Love Supreme poem, or poetic, I wrote that myself. I wrote it this summer, just in lieu of all the things that were going on in the summer, especially the whole Breonna Taylor situation really provoked me to kind of put some things on paper. And really the whole idea of having Black men watch Black women get assaulted is what really, one, frustrated me to the core, and two, just, inspired me to do something productive and artistic. From a historical context, right? Even on in the plantation system, a very common phenomenon, the enslaver would come into the households of the Africans, take the wife and have his way with her, and the husband would be forced to watch, right? You fast forward to today's society, I see so many videos of women being assaulted, being verbally assaulted, and there's dozens of men around, and all they're doing is recording, right? So to me, this idea of watching has become problematic, right? And at a certain point, we can't watch. We have to get that knee off our neck. And there's a lot of conversation that was going around over the summer pertaining to why do Black men not protect Black women, right? And one part of me, I think that's a misnomer. I don't know if that's completely the case, but that question is what drove that response that I produced through the poetic, right? Yeah, so just to kind of give you guys that insight, hence the whole, for 37 years, I'm 37 years old, but then also taking it back to a broader experience in the sense of someone who studied African occurrences, African history, right? I could go back 400 years and see that the same things are still in play. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning of class, right? This is our last time meeting to discuss material. Next time when we meet, you guys will be presenting your information for your projects. So do be prepared for that. And then whatever we do not finish, we'll use the time during our finals to complete those projects. Is there any questions you guys have about anything before we let out?
I have a question. How many journals should there be in total?
Good question. Let me pull up the Google Classroom site and we'll count those out. I want to say like 13, but we'll double check. Give me 1 second, okay? Okay, so for weeks 1 through 3, we have 3 entries. Yeah, so we have 3 entries for week 1 through 3. So 3 entries for weeks 4 through 7, so that's 6. So 2 more entries for weeks 8 through 11, so that puts us at 8. So that's 11, 11. And then you could just choose one of the poems to do your entry about. You don't have to do all of them. So just choose one, or if you want to choose a couple, you could do that as well. So you should have about 12 to 13 entries, depending on how many poems that you do. Does that make sense, Melissa?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?